I'm here again with Terry Byrne, our parish's volunteer historian, and this is part two of our series on the history of St. Joseph's Parish. Thanks for joining us, Terry. So, Terry, we ended our last segment talking about some of the photo history of our parish. Are there other avenues of research that you've been following or exploring?
Yes, one of the big ones was capturing newspaper articles dealing with St. Joseph's Parish and its parishioners. I should note, Chris, that when I did my research for the book, the only research information we had was one file folder filled with 20 documents. So it wasn't very plentiful for research. So in order to capture some of this research, I started going to the archives. And I started looking at the newspapers dealing with the Ottawa Journal and the Ottawa Citizen, and then other newspapers. And to date, I've compiled over 2,200 articles dealing with St. Joseph's Church and its parishioners. And these go back to 1866. And I'm still compiling them on the recent events, recent parishioners' activities, and I'm finding new articles from other sources of information. Now, to give you an example, what I've done is I put the articles in books like this, and I have 7 of these books. And they go by year sequence, and in the year, the articles are copied and pasted, and I also put the newspaper that they come from and the date. I didn't put the page number because for some of you who are old enough, you'll know that we had the Morning Citizen and the Evening Citizen, so the page number would vary by depending on what version of the paper you read that day. So 2,200 articles and counting, and it's a great source of information because from that I've learned so much about the parish. But in addition to that, I've also gone on the web and obtained information. I've got publications that are in there. I've got lots of information from the university student newspaper that was in existence in the late 1800s. And as you recall, the St. Joseph's Parish and Ottawa U were closely affiliated back then.
So photographs and clippings are important sources, important archival sources for the history of St. Joseph's. What about parish bulletins? Bulletins are so important in any Catholic church. How did you find time, or did you find the time to collect bulletins?
Well, we don't do a good job collecting our bulletins. I took on that job back in 2006. And from 2006 to today, they're all current. But prior to that, between 1990 and 2006, it was more a patchwork of bulletins. And I've been trying to fill in the gap in that period. But as I said, sometimes it's looking for the information and finding out where it's located. And I found out that our bulletins were given to the Oblate Archive over on Main Street, Deschâtelet, and they had all their bulletins from 1960 to 1990, and they were all put in a booklet. And so I've gone over there and I started photographing the pages or the bulletins so we would have a record on site. Good thing I started because about 2 years ago they moved to Richelieu, and so did our bulletins. So I've got 1960 to 1983 done, but I still have 7 more years to do. And the person who helped me a lot with that was Rolly LaRue. And unfortunately, Rolly is deceased now. So it takes 2 people to actually photograph these bulletins. And once I find somebody else who can help me, I will go to Richelieu and get the rest of them photographed.
So not everyone may know in our parish, but religious sisters have been involved in the life of this church for some time. Where do you stand on that research?
Well, that's an interesting part of the research because for a lot of parishioners, they don't realize that we used to have parish schools assigned to us, which was very common back in the 40s and 50s. And we had parish schools, and we wanted religious nuns to teach our children. And so over the years, we've had 7 different religious sister congregations involved in St. Joe's. Now, Father Laurie Conlon was the one who alerted me to it. He said that you should write something about the nuns in your book, but I didn't have any information, and the church had no information, not even a photograph of them. So I wrote a small piece about the sisters, but not enough to satisfy Laurie Common. And I did promise him that I would do more research. And in the last 3 years, I've started that research, and I've found out a lot of information about these religious sisters and have gotten photos. But a lot of the religious sisters are up in age, and they're not really able to help that much anymore. They'd like to, but unfortunately they're not capable right now, in some cases.
Now, are there other sectors of our parish's history where you've done some research?
Yes, I worked on making sure that our blueprints are kept and retained properly. And one anecdote I would say is that if you ever wondered why a blueprint was called a blueprint, all you have to take a look at is our 1931 blueprint of the construction of this church. It is so blue. And maybe one day if we ever get down to the vault, I'll bring it up and I'll take it out and I'll show it to you.
Great. Our parishioners were also involved in the wars. Is that an area you've researched as well?
Interestingly, Rolly LaRue helped me on this one as well, and what we ended up doing was writing stories about each of the parishioners who died in World War I and World War II, and we put that information at the base of our plaques in the church, which you'll find in the front entrance of the church. Interestingly enough, one anecdote on this is we had a call come in from Holland about a man who wanted to know about Canadians who fought and died in the war in his village. And one of our parishioners did. And we've kept a conversation going on. We've provided him with all the information he needs to identify all the other Canadians who died. And that village is now going to recognize those Canadians who died in the Second World War.
So, as we near the end of this interview, there's lots of anecdotes in our church's history, and you've mentioned some brief ones. Do you have one more that we can close with?
Yeah, I think it's a good indication of the type of people of our parish and the pride they have in the parish. There was another parish, I won't mention its name, that was doing its parish history and was going to write a similar book. And they did not get a lot of positive feedback from people who were going to be interviewed. A lot of people didn't want to be interviewed, didn't want to share their knowledge about or experience about the parish, and were reticent to offer very much information. The complete opposite happened when I wrote the book. I interviewed over 100 parishioners and former parishioners, some who were, I was advised, wanted nothing more to do with St. Joe's. But I phoned them up anyways because I wanted to find out why. And I can tell you right now that every one of them, even the ones who are negative, had fond memories of the church and were very happy to provide stories and reflection. And even the ones who were negative actually came out to the 2006 150th anniversary celebration. So there's a wealth of stories from these people, and I was happy to interview them and get their stories.
So this is the end of part 2 of this series, but we're looking at a part 3. Where would you like to take us?
I think the next phase would probably be on showing the parishioners the various artifacts we've discovered in the church over the years. And I think that will probably prove to be very enlightening.
That's great. Thanks so much for coming in, Terry.
Thank you, Chris.